You should never trust a botanist to know anything about alligator biology.
Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to the BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. I am Priscilla Crawford, co-coordinator of BioBlitz Oklahoma and conservation biologist with the Oklahoma Biological Survey. I co-host this podcast with Angelina Stancampiano of Oklahoma State Parks. This podcast is an extension of our BioBlitz Oklahoma events. Now we can celebrate Oklahoma's biodiversity with you all year round. In this Meet the Expert episode, I chat with Amy Buthod, my colleague at the Oklahoma Biological Survey, and our plant team leader for BioBlitz. She is my go-to botanist when I have plant identification questions or need an expert botanist in the field with me. She tallies the plant list for our fall BioBlitzes and verifies all of our iNaturalist plant observations for our virtual BioBlitzes. Join us as we talk about what it's like to be a professional botanist and what excites her about working in Oklahoma.
Amy Buthod. My title technically is Botanical Specialist. I work at the Oklahoma Biological Survey, which is a unit of the College of Arts and Sciences on the OU campus in Norman. Botanical Specialist encompasses three basic job functions. First of all, I am the collections manager of the Robert Bepp Herbarium, which is a collection of over 250,000 vascular plant specimens. I am the heritage botanist for Oklahoma, where I am charged with updating, maintaining a list of species of concern, which I guess we could talk about later, for Oklahoma. Sort of rare, unusual plants for the state. I'm charged with making that list and ranking those species, and also conduct floristic inventories throughout the state of Oklahoma. That's where I'll go to an area like a nature conservancy preserve or a wildlife management area, aim to collect and document every single species of vascular plant that I find. I collect those specimens, I prepare them, I put them in the herbarium, and usually that work results in a species list, which managers, wildlife managers, whatever, can use to make conservation decisions about their particular piece of property.
Great. Thank you, Amy, and welcome to our BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. Amy has been one of our botanical experts from the beginning of BioBlitz. The last several years, you have been responsible for tallying all of our plants at BioBlitz, and you have been verifying all the plant identifications that we have posted on iNaturalist during our virtual events. That's a huge task, and I'm super thankful that you're willing to spend the time to look through those hundreds or thousands of photographs. So you talked about the three components of your job, and like so many biologists that I've talked to, we don't seem to have a typical work day. So what do you do as a botanical specialist and herbarium collection manager, like on a regular basis?
My job duties are quite varied, thankfully. I tend to have a short attention span, so I like being able to flip from various activities. A typical day in the herbarium, there's a lot of filing, so I've got to know the alphabet. Yay! A lot of organizing. There's some arts and crafts, and that's what I refer to as preparing the herbarium specimens. People probably aren't terribly familiar with an herbarium unless they had a botany class. And as I said in the intro, these are real-life plant specimens that are collected, pressed in this thing called a plant press. They're dried, so they're really, really flat, and then they're glued to paper. So I am responsible for preparing all the specimens that I collect, that entire process. You have to glue them, arrange them on paper. It's a little bit artsy-craftsy. Right now, the herbarium is involved in a project with other herbaria throughout the state and with herbaria in Texas. This is an NSF-funded project. We are taking really high-quality images of all these specimens, and these are going to be available online for people to see and to use, researchers, the public, whoever needs to look at these plant specimens. So those are the things I'm doing primarily in the herbarium right now. Obviously, I have a field season. Our field season is usually from March through October, whenever the plants are in bloom, obviously. During field season, I go out of the office a lot. We show up in the morning, we get all our field equipment together, we drive to a field site, and then basically we get out and we look for plants. I can either be involved in a specialized project, like I mentioned earlier, doing an inventory of a wildlife management area or whatever, or there's a lot of random collecting because we take our opportunities where we can get them. Oklahoma does not have a lot of public land, and a lot of landowners are not willing to let people onto their land to look for plants. People are really hesitant to let us on their property. So whenever we do get the opportunity to visit a piece of property that's botanically interesting, we're just going to collect whatever. The rare plant component of my job, I frequently have funding to look for certain rare plants. And in those cases, we'll go out in the field and sort of target a few particular species.
I would like to talk a little bit more about the herbarium because, like you said, a lot of people probably haven't visited one. I mean, an herbarium is a scientific collection, just like any other museum collection. People have been to museums where there's dinosaurs or human artifacts. Like you said, most people haven't visited an herbarium and seen what it's like. Would you describe it a little bit more?
Oh, sure. On the OU campus, the herbarium is the only natural history collection that is not in the Sam Noble Museum of Natural History. It's actually jointly administered by the Department of Microbiology and Plant Biology and the Oklahoma Biological Survey. It's on the OU campus. It's a room full of these tall metal bookshelf-like cabinets. There are about 220 of them in the room. It's a cold room. We keep it about 60 degrees, and that's to sort of slow down any sort of insect activities. Since these are actual plant specimens, they're vulnerable to bugs, particularly this critter called the cigarette beetle. They'll get in there and they'll eat all your plant specimens. And obviously you don't like that. So we keep it cold. We keep the specimens in these tall cabinets. The specimens are filed based on how they are related to each other in an evolutionary sort of way. And we also have the specimens organized by geography. There's really not a lot to see for the public unless you are coming to work with a particular plant group or to see a particular species. There's just really not much to look at that most members of the public would be really interested in. And especially, little kids, dinosaurs, ooh, exciting. It would take a special kind of little kid to be excited over a plant specimen. I'm sure they exist. I probably would have thought it was super cool when I was a kid. Yeah, there's not really a lot to see. A lot of people think natural history collections, they think the dinosaurs, they think archaeological artifacts, things like that, big showy things. Nobody really thinks about
dioramas, things like that.
Dioramas, yes. Nobody ever thinks about drawers full of stuffed birds or
right.
boxes full of Miocene era horse teeth or plant collections. So it's a little bit different than what a lot of people think of as a natural history collection.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people don't understand the importance of these collections to scientific research. There's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding that you're just collecting for collecting's sake, but these specimens are used for research, both historic and current research. So I used herbarium records to map invasive species across Oklahoma, looking for invasion patterns geographically and also across time. Other people have used herbarium records for lots of different things, climate change studies, different kinds of genetic work. Have you been involved in any research related to the herbarium specimens in our collection?
I have not. My job keeps me pretty busy, so I don't really have time for any sort of research projects. Just doing what I'm supposed to do pretty much eats up all my time. Obviously, the students here on campus use the herbarium, and so I've helped them. We've had students doing phenological work, looking at how and when plants flower over time, considering climate change or things blooming earlier now. And of course, we have a lot of people using the specimens to get DNA. You can actually get usable, readable DNA from really, really old specimens.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our specimens are used that way. They will ask permission to take a tiny little bit of tissue, usually a piece of leaf material, and they could get DNA out of that. And that's usually to sort of figure out how things are related to each other in the plant world.
Yeah, a lot of collections that are using these newer techniques that nobody would have dreamed of 100 years ago when these specimens were being collected.
Correct. And it's really amazing that you could get DNA out of something so old. And obviously, it depends on the species and how quickly the plant was dried. If a plant was dried really, really quickly, the DNA is less likely to be deteriorated. It's really amazing.
Of course, you don't spend all your time in this windowless room with thousands of flat plants. You already talked about some of your field work. It sounds like you have two major components. One, looking for rare species, but then also you're almost essentially hired by other groups to do plant surveys. Can you tell us how the plant surveys for other entities work and why are they interested in having you tell them all about their plants?
Okay, yeah. Usually, when that happens, we are given a tiny amount of money from whatever organization it is, usually just enough to fund our travel. And I'll step back a bit, and this may be something that you hear from other people over the series of podcasts. Basic survey work is notoriously underfunded. There is no money anywhere ever for people just to go out and collect plants or to collect birds. That's seen as old fashioned by people, and there's just not a lot of money out there. So I'm tasked with these jobs, but then there's no money to actually do them. We do have to solicit from other organizations. The Nature Conservancy is a big one, the Wildlife Department, the federal government. Rarely do these entities actually have staff botanists. So they turn to outside people, and that usually means the people at the Biological Survey. I mentioned our field season is from March to October. We want to try to visit as many different sorts of habitat as possible. And then starting in March or when the plants start blooming, we'll show up usually once a month, depending on the size of the area involved. We'll spend 1 or 2 days visiting all those different areas and just collecting one of everything we see. We'll come back every month. Each day after we're collecting plants in the field, you have to press them and dry them, and then you have to take them back to the lab and identify them, and then you have to prepare the specimens and prepare the list. It's a really, really long process that takes a good amount of time.
For the time you're in the field, there's probably 2 times as much time spent dealing with the specimens, right?
I think that's probably a good estimate. And in some cases, for some projects, we've had to collect multiple specimens, in some cases, like 3 of each species. And pressing plants gets old. It's one of those things as a student, you think, oh, this is so cool and fun, but
Yeah.
it loses the thrill after you've been outside in August and you just want to go take a shower and get all of the ticks off of you, but you're still in the hotel parking lot pressing hundreds and hundreds of plants. I'm not complaining. It is just an aspect of the job.
Well, and then the preparation. I mean, it's a time-consuming process to press and then to put those press specimens on sheet and type in all the data and glue them all down. That's lots of extra work.
Lots of extra work. And in herbarium groups, there's frequent discussion on how much an herbarium specimen is actually worth. Obviously, these are scientific specimens and they're priceless because they can't be replaced. But I can't remember the last figure I've seen, but it's pretty high for each specimen. It's like at least well over $10 per specimen.
Oh, wow.
For insurance purposes, so that's why that comes up.
Oh, yeah. Not only is the plant itself valuable, but the data associated with the specimen is sometimes even more valuable than the actual plant specimen, especially some of those historical collections. Back in the olden days, botanists would keep field notebooks of all the specimens they collected, and it kept information about the habitat, population size, other associated plants, and those sorts of things in this booklet. And then that was eventually transcribed onto the label of the plant specimen. But now collection notebooks are kind of, I would think, considered old-timey, as you said, an antiquated practice now to have a collection notebook associated. So how do you keep track of the data? So you talked about collecting all these plants and putting them in the field press, but how do you keep track of all the data associated with it so it ends up with the herbarium record later?
One of my coworkers probably has written down everything she has ever seen since she's been a botanist, and it's incredibly enviable, but I am just not that organized. But I do keep a notebook, mainly just to keep my GPS waypoints. In order to keep track of location information, GPS units have these things called waypoints, and I'll hit a waypoint at a place where I'm collecting plants. I'll write that waypoint down in my notebook, of course, along with information such as the date and who I'm working with, and just little notes about the plants that are growing there, about the habitat. Other people will write down as they press every single specimen that they are pressing. I just shudder at the amount of time that would take with some of these inventory projects where I've collected 250 species in one day. And that's like in May and June. May and June are the worst months for plant pressing in the evenings because there's so many things.
And then do you keep spreadsheets of stuff?
Yes. I put all of that information into a spreadsheet that ideally will be able to be uploaded into a larger database. So we don't have to enter that data again. A lot of herbarium data nowadays is online. In addition to the pictures of the specimens I mentioned, a lot of the data from the labels are online.
Having spent several years working in the herbarium, I'm well familiar with a lot of procedures and things and collectors, and I spent many, many hours typing in that information from old herbarium specimens into these databases that you were talking about that are now all online. I was always fascinated by the collectors who kept track of every individual plant they collected with a unique number. Like you mentioned, your colleague keeping track in their collection notebook. Every single plant they collected got a unique number. The number would be up in the tens of thousands for their collections. Do you keep track?
Most people who collect, well, I should say all people who collect a lot of herbarium specimens assign each collection a collection number. That number is unique or should be unique to that particular collector. Although, in addition to alphabetizing problems, I have counting problems sometimes. And I do have duplicate collection numbers, but it's really not a big deal. I start all my collection numbers with my initials and then just a number. Or if it's a particular project, like for a particular wildlife refuge, I usually just assign it a code and then a number.
So what's your estimate of how many specimens you've collected in your career?
I would say at this point, 20,000.
Whoa.
Yeah, a lot. Let's say a lot. I've been doing this for 20 years now. I've had plenty of opportunities.
Right. We have known each other for over 20 years. I think our first semester of graduate school was together.
That is correct. Yes.
We started with a fair number of women in the botany department that semester.
I don't actually remember any men at all. Oh, except for, of course, your husband.
Oh, but he had been there for several years already.
Okay. All right.
He had started before us. But that semester, yeah, there were several of us. And I was working on plant ecology, but you did your degree in plant taxonomy, right?
Yes. Systematics, yes. And my master's degree was doing a project on an orchid group that does not even live anywhere close to Oklahoma, the genus Bulbophyllum, which is the largest genus in the orchid family, which is the largest plant.
Oh.
Yes. It was a bit ambitious, shall we say, for a master's project. The DNA work that I mentioned earlier, grinding up little bits of plants and sequencing their DNA to see how they are related to each other. You know, that's sort of something you don't really stay in unless you're going to be in academia. You know, there's not much call for that particular skill set in the real world.
Right.
I realized pretty early on that I was not cut out for academia, just not for me. that a more applied route would probably be better. At the same time as I was doing that work down in the lab, I had the opportunity to be the research assistant for the herbarium. And that gave me the opportunity to learn about Oklahoma plants. For that part of my graduate school career, I was basically doing nothing but preparing those plant specimens, gluing them to paper. So I got bored. And actually, that was a long time ago. Before podcast, people who are mounting plants today, they have plenty of things to listen to.
I know. We just had the radio.
Just the radio, yeah. And you probably remember in the herbarium, we had that old ancient stereo that you could sort of get KGOU on. That was before, definitely before iPhones and iPods and everything. So anyway, my point is I was bored. And to alleviate my boredom, I would play a little game with myself. And that would be, what is this plant? Basically, I taught myself plants by mounting specimens. I would hide the labels and then I would try and guess and just playing a little game. And that's how I became familiar with the flora of Oklahoma. And that's how, when this job became available, I was ready to take it. They needed somebody who was familiar with the flora, and I actually had those skills.
So it was your job during graduate school that helped you with your current position.
Absolutely.
And not necessarily the research you were doing for your master's.
Absolutely, 100% correct. With the exception that using plants in that particular way in the lab informed me of what other people would be doing when they were requesting herbarium specimens to do that similar sort of work. At least I could speak the language.
So you mentioned that mounting these specimens as a graduate student, you learned Oklahoma plants, but how did you get interested in plants in general? Like, how old were you when you decided, oh, plants are what I want to learn about?
This will be a surprising answer, but I think I was probably 25. So I have always loved the outdoors and biology. As a kid, I was more animal focused.
Yes, in fact, Rusty Grimpy, who was on the podcast episode number 2, told me that you were one of his zoo teens.
Yes.
So we know you've been interested in that sort of thing since then, at least.
Yes. As a kid, my dad always grew a big garden and we always had plants, and it was always really exciting for me to plant seeds and go to the garden store and things like that. Not so much helping my dad with the farm labor, but you're a kid, you're outside, you're having fun. I did a zoology degree at OU first with academia in mind. I came to the conclusion that I am just too sensitive when it comes to animals. There's a lot of necessary killing involved. I just couldn't take it. Now, obviously, I have no problem at all killing plants, since I just told you I've done it at least 15 to 20,000 times, but animals were a different story. Basically, I didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated. I just sort of bopped around doing horrible temporary jobs.
You had time in between your bachelor's and your master's?
I did. It seems like it was a long time, but looking back, it was really only 2 years,
When you're 22, 2 years seems like a long time.
Exactly. And also, some of those temporary jobs were really horrible, so they just seemed a lot longer. Yeah, so I thought, okay, what am I going to do with myself? I really can't remember the thought process, but I thought I would come back to campus and take some botany classes because I had always liked plants in addition to animals. I was just going to get a second bachelor's degree, and somewhere along the line said that was dumb. Why don't you just go to graduate school? So obviously not the best path towards graduate school, not something I would particularly recommend to people, especially since it costs so much money these days. I've been really, really lucky.
I feel the same way about plants and animal study as you do. And I was always very interested in animals too. I mentioned in a previous podcast that my first love was the tadpoles in a puddle in our backyard when I was very little. And that made me want to be a scientist. Just like you, I realized there's a lot of killing involved. There's a lot of dissection. And like you, I was just too sensitive and thought, well, I can handle plants and it doesn't seem as scary.
They don't look at you.
Right.
I'm with you on the tadpoles. Every year, my mother would take me to Woodward Park, which is a really nice park in Tulsa. And there are all these fountains that would fill with tadpoles, and we would get a dishpan and bring some home. And I would do the same thing. I would watch the tadpoles until they went on their way. And also, yeah, you talked about Rusty. At one point, I probably did think that I wanted to work in the zoo. Rusty didn't run me off. It wasn't his fault. Again, I'm just overly sensitive about animals. I did work at the zoo in Tulsa. I worked with a lot of critters, particularly with the reptiles. I did that a whole lot. Not as much poop to pick up and not as stinky.
Right.
So there's an advantage there. Mean old Rusty did make me take care of the mouse colony and the crickets, which absolutely disgusting.
Oh, which are the food for the reptiles.
Yes. And there was cannibalism in both of those cases. And yeah, gross. So again, that sort of led me away from animals. As an undergrad, we had a really mean graduate student who laughed at us for not wanting to kill our own frogs.
Ugh. Botanists tend to have a reputation, kind of low-key, compared to some, for example, like the herpetologists, which we've had.
We all know about them, yes.
Which we've had on the podcast. We could still have crazy days in the field too as botanists. I know I enjoy hearing about people's memorable days in the field. Sometimes they're about like how grueling it was to scramble through the greenbrier in August, or how you finally found a particular rare species you were hunting for. Do you have a memorable day in the field that you would like to share with us?
It was memorable when we finally found a population of Oklahoma's only federally listed endangered plant species. This is a really exciting plant, and I do say that sarcastically. It's exciting to botanists, but the public would probably go, ugh, what's that? Oklahoma only has one endangered plant species, and it's this thing called Harparella. Scientific name is Harparella nodosa or Limnium nodosa. It's a member of the carrot family. It's an aquatic plant. If you're familiar with how carrots and related plants flower, they have their flowers in an umbrella-like little structure.
They're just tiny white flowers, right?
Tiny white flowers, an umbel of tiny white flowers. The plant doesn't even have real leaves because it's an aquatic plant, and it's lost part of its leaf structure. So basically just like a center stalk remains. Not a very exciting plant to your average person, but very exciting to us because it is an endangered species and none had ever been found in Oklahoma. It had always been suspected that it was around. I just happened to be in a kayak on a river, and I'm not going to say which river, in McCurtain County. Saw some white flowers from a distance. And again, it must have been a huge population because I was on the other side of the river, and I don't know how I could have seen this tiny plant otherwise.
So were you looking for it specifically? Were you like, we really need to find this plant and it's probably here?
No, I was down there looking for an invasive species. Somebody had reported that they had seen this thing called hydrilla, which I know you're familiar with, in the river. We were down there looking for that and for whatever other things we can find. Again, it was just sort of one of those, hey, let's go and collect what we can. Also, hey, cool, we're on the river in a kayak. You can't have a bad day then. I mean, seriously, that's certainly a perk of this job, is being able to go out and do cool stuff like that and call it work.
I've had a few bad days in a kayak at work, though. Just FYI. When the water's too low and it's August and it's really hot and there's a wind advisory.
I'm sure it's possible. Yeah. No, that sounds bad. And the low, again, on the same river, I ended up in the emergency room because of that.
Oh,
yeah,
no.
That was with a canoe, which I can't even imagine taking a canoe to this place where I was. That's another aspect of field work, is hurting oneself a whole lot. Getting back to the endangered species, finding that and realizing, hey, I think this is actually Harparella, and coming to that realization, that was pretty cool. That was, I think, in 2013, and I've gone back to visit that population to make sure it's still there every year. But last year, I wasn't able to go last year. Another really memorable day was down at Red Slough, which is also in McCurtain County. We go to McCurtain County a lot because it's the most botanically rich area in Oklahoma. Lots of cool things down there to collect. Red Slough, as people probably have heard, is where there are a lot of American alligators.
Oh, yeah. We talked to Jessa about the alligators.
Oh, yeah. Well, you should never trust a botanist to know anything about alligator biology. Yes, I worked with herps a lot when I was in high school, but for some reason they didn't let the teenagers near the alligators. I can't imagine why. So we were there, we see the nest. It's late summer. We figured, oh, baby alligators, they're gone. Let's go look at this cool nest. Yeah, So we're down there. We're looking at this cool alligator nest. This is a lake that is just covered in lily pads. You can't see the water at all. It's nothing but flowers and green leaves. So we're down there joking, where's the alligators? Where are you, alligator? La, 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 la. Botanists being dumb, tormenting the wildlife, which we actually think is not anywhere around at all. This nest doesn't look like anything. We're walking up the bank. I look over my shoulder and, hey, guess who's there? It's Mom. She's about 3 feet behind us.
3 feet.
Well, one thing I do know about alligators is they don't move very fast once they're on land, but still, there was a little initial pants wetting and a little initial shrieking. But of course, we immediately ran to get our cameras and went right back because we're idiots.
Ugh.
From a safe distance, of course. But I guess I didn't know, and this may be common knowledge, and I may just be outing myself as an ignorant botanist. The alligators, actually, the nest was still active. They come out, I've been told, in the fall or really, really late summer, and they immediately go into hibernation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was very exciting, of course. We knew that they were there. We had kind of seen them, eyeballs poking out of the lily pads from far, far away. But yeah, that was up close and personal and really, really stupid. And let me tell you, for the rest of the day, we were sort of hesitant to go collect that marginal vegetation. Since then, I have gone back and I've been to see those alligators close up, actually, to see their nest even. There's nest cams, and I went out with somebody to check the nest cams, and he had no qualms about stepping down there. And the alligators, he's like, they're not going to move that fast. Okay, I'll take your word for it. I'll stay in the truck. I've seen bears a couple of times. Seeing a bear in Oklahoma isn't the most usual thing. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I haven't seen a bear in the wild in Oklahoma yet.
They're always pretty scrawny looking. Both times I think it's been early spring and they've just come out. And the first one I saw, I just thought it was a large dog at first.
Oh, wow.
Again, something you kind of want to see from a distance.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you do a lot of work down in McCurtain County because it's botanically rich. Getting back to BioBlitz a little bit. So which BioBlitz was most interesting botanically? We did one down in McCurtain County at Broken Bow, one of the first ones, like 2019, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that was the second one.
Yeah, after the Sutton Urban Wilderness here in Norman. Was that the most interesting botanically, or do you have another favorite plant BioBlitz?
Oh my goodness. Well, the McCurtain County one was so long ago, I don't really remember much about it, except for the silly stuff that happened in the evenings around the campfire. But,
right.
Yeah, not botany. When I'm doing BioBlitz, it's just so busy in terms of answering all the questions that people have, trying to do a really comprehensive list. I haven't really had a favorite because I really am intensely focused on that list, probably more so than I should be. I do think it's a fun challenge. I know we'll never beat the invertebrate people, but I do think it's a fun challenge to fill out that list and, try to identify things when there are really not much of the plant left. Now we're doing this in October and it's not really the best time for plants, but we're still able to get a good number of species on that list from little tiny dead bits. And I think that's sort of fun.
And a lot of people are interested and have lots of questions about the plants, mostly because they're super easy to observe. That's another reason why I started learning about plants, is because they don't leave when you're trying to study them or identify them. So that means there's a lot of observation opportunity for all of our citizen scientists. So I'm not surprised that you get overwhelmed with lots of questions and photographs and discussion. And there's like 2,000 species that potentially could be found in the state. So it's a wide range as compared to the 101 mammals you might find in Oklahoma. Making the list and answering people's questions about all of the species you could see, yeah, I'm sure takes up a big amount of your time.
Yeah, and towards the end where we're,
everybody's throwing lists at you and you're trying to count them all together.
Or where we're, we do take this somewhat seriously. And the fall in Oklahoma is yellow, sunflower, and grass season, meaning we have a lot of these grasses and usually goldenrods and asters to identify. And those two groups are notoriously difficult to identify. So we'll be trying to key something out, trying to identify it, and people will be asking questions. And I may have unintentionally grouched at somebody. So if I've done that to anybody, I apologize. It's not you. I'm just trying to identify this silly plant and get it on the list.
The stress of botany.
The stress is like, no, be quiet, be quiet.
I remember I was in charge of the list for a couple years, several years ago before I became the coordinator. I just remember I had to go somewhere where nobody could talk to me.
Yes.
To make sure I was not double counting things, and make sure I added Mark Howry's plants to the list and all of that.
There were a couple of years where people were using non-standardized lists, and that I was just like, what are you people trying to do to me? But yeah, that's why I'm so adamant on this is the list. Please give it to people.
Yes. Yeah. So you create, whenever we do our in-person BioBlitz, you create a plant list that I distribute to the people that I think are going to be doing a lot of the botany observations, so that then it's so much easier to compare and add and tally everything together, collate it all.
Most definitely. Everybody is using the same names, more or less, which is
more or less
really, really important. Just to explain that a bit, we use Latin names, but sometimes the Latin name changes.
A subject for a whole nother podcast.
Oh boy, would anybody listen to that?
Right.
Botanical synonymy. Next.
Yeah, right. Well, and just the problems with common names, because a lot of our citizen scientists like to use common names, and they're obviously more accessible to the majority of participants. Plant names, even the scientific names, change, and then you have all the common crazy names.
Yes, where one name can refer to multiple plants, and multiple plants can have the same name.
So the inventory for BioBlitz, I have thought, as not being, in the past, the inventory is not significant scientifically. It is important for the land managers that we can give the lists to, so the park managers or whatever entity we're doing the BioBlitz at. I've considered BioBlitz primarily an outreach event, fun and educational for all the participants, including the professional biologists as well as the citizen scientists that we have. Since we've started using iNaturalist for our BioBlitz records, I feel like we are now really contributing to a global database of biodiversity, and that our observations are actually scientifically significant now that we can add these to this global database. We have people all over the world using this database for research, and it's helped improve our understanding of the species geographic distributions and phenology. And this is an easy way for people to contribute similar data that they would if they were doing those herbarium specimens that you talked about. They can just use their cell phone camera, which is so much easier. And our BioBlitzers are now finding plants that are new to the state, and even made a few observations of rare plants in all of these records, which you have been verifying for people. And you've spent hours and hours and hours doing these record verifications. Do you see that iNaturalist and these citizen scientist projects are helping us understand the plants in our state better?
They are certainly helping me this past BioBlitz in the spring, we had a new species to the state reported. Believe it or not, we still are adding species to our state flora. And when I mean that, it's not like new discoveries to science, but a plant that wasn't in the state before, or we didn't realize that it was in the state before, is here now. Oftentimes, unfortunately, those are new exotic weeds, but sometimes, every once in a while, a new native plant is reported, something that has just moved in or something that has just been overlooked. The Herparella, the endangered species that I mentioned earlier, is an example of that. The April BioBlitz, someone actually found a little plant called Valerianella locusta. Oh, goodness, I should have got a common name for that. It's a corn salad. It's a little white flowered plant that blooms in the spring. It's an exotic species, but still, it was really cool to see it for the first time and to be able to document that it's now part of the flora of Oklahoma. There were actually two different observations for that species in two different locations. Fortunately, I was able to verify the ID from the photos. Sometimes you cannot use photos for identification verifications because of the tiny, minute differences that are used to differentiate species. Sometimes those just don't show up in photos.
Right.
In terms of rare stuff, right now I'm going through a year's worth of Oklahoma iNaturalist observations, pulling all the rare species observations. As you can imagine, that's pretty time consuming. Fortunately, I don't have to go through photo by photo. I can get direct downloads of all those data. So far, I think, I've pulled maybe 15 records for rare species, mostly orchids, I believe. So these are things that I would not have been able to observe this spring, especially when we weren't allowed to do field work. I didn't observe anything, but our citizen scientists were able to make these observations, which are very helpful and help me with my job as a heritage botanist. I mentioned we rank species according to their rarity. Well, observations play into those rankings. And so the citizen scientists help me with that work.
Well, and as you mentioned before, funding for survey work is really low. There's this perception that we understand the species distribution within the state really well by now because, we've been a state for over 100 years. Don't we know all the plants already? Although there's lots of information that we can continue to gather about species distributions and importance of when they're flowering now. I feel these iNaturalist observations and the BioBlitz participants in particular are really helping us to better understand the state and allow us to do more research on these species distributions when we can't be out there scouring the countryside ourselves.
That is certainly correct. We also can get information about cool places to visit. If I notice a lot of observations from a particular park in northeastern Oklahoma, I can make it a point to go to that particular park. That's something that I've done and will continue to do. And I can only see the use of iNaturalist data increasing and becoming more and more useful. And I know for a fact that that is the case based on some recent webinars I have attended. I'm actually getting ready to be a curator on iNaturalist, so that will allow me to do more things with the data more efficiently.
Oh, nice. I promote iNaturalist a lot lately, especially since it's really improved over the last couple years, and we will continue to use it during BioBlitz, and it'll probably be our primary way of keeping the inventory for all of our future BioBlitzes, just because it's so easy for our citizen scientists to upload observations, and then it goes directly into this useful database for the world to use.
I think that's great.
Okay, we've reached our quick question round. I have some kind of fun, short questions that I like to ask everybody. And you can answer them with short answers, or you can expound as much as you want. Your answers don't have to be quick. So you're from Tulsa, or the Tulsa area, and went to OU. And so you've spent almost your whole life in Oklahoma. So you've had many years of adventures around the state. What's your favorite place in Oklahoma to explore outside?
Well, I like to be where the people aren't. I think I saw that on a t-shirt. The most interesting places to me are when I'm driving back roads and there's no one around and there's no sign of anyone being anywhere around. I'm thinking specifically of like the logging roads down in McCurtain County. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to drive around on those. I mean, you could get really, really out there.
Oh, yeah.
McCurtain County Wilderness Area, that's a really great place to go. It takes so long just to get there. Chances of running into anybody, very rare. In LaFleur County, there's this really cool road that weaves in and out of Oklahoma and Arkansas. It's actually near the headwaters of the Mountain Fork River. You can actually find the headwaters of the Mountain Fork River. It's really the easternmost part of the state that you can go to, and it's so similar. I mean, like I said, the road weaves in and out of Arkansas. It's Arkansas. It's the flora there is really different. There are magnolia trees.
Wow.
Yeah, and not different species, not the ones that you're thinking of, Magnolia grandiflora, not that one, but there are other magnolias, and they are really cool.
That are wild.
And orchids and just a lot of interesting stuff. That's actually where I saw my most recent bear. He was technically in Arkansas, though. He was on the wrong side of the road. Yeah, that's a really neat place to go. And also driving around the back roads in the Black Mesa area. There's just nobody there. You see antelope. Driving by in a truck, we actually had a really large rattlesnake rattle at the truck from the side of the road. It was pretty silly. It's just like, who do you think you're fooling, mister? Those really isolated areas are intriguing to me. And those are usually the areas that have the best plants.
Yeah. Okay, so question 2, you've already mentioned alligators and black bears and the rare endangered Harperella species. Is one of those, or do you have another of one of your most exciting organisms that you have seen in the wild?
I think those would probably be the most exciting. You know, it doesn't take a lot to excite a botanist, and what's exciting to us may not be exciting to others. Seeing the big Kentucky lady slipper orchids, those are pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
Finding a population of the Texas horse crippler cactus, again, something that's crazy abundant down in Texas. That's really cool. I enjoyed seeing that. I'm pretty easy to please. You know, I get excited about seeing a nice plot of grass somewhere with some nice prairie plants.
Okay, number 3, what is on your natural history bucket list?
Oh my goodness. At this point, I would go just about anywhere.
Right, with the travel restrictions we've had.
In terms of Oklahoma, I haven't really had a chance to get out much in western Oklahoma the past few years. One thing about Oklahoma is it's got weird vegetational patterns. Obviously, the vegetation in the eastern part of the state is totally different than the western part of the state. If you're busy doing field work in one part of the state for too long, you kind of lose the plants from the other part of the state. So I'm afraid that my western Oklahoma botany has fallen out of my head somewhat, and I'd really like the opportunity to brush up on that. I really like western Oklahoma. A lot of people don't appreciate it because all they see is I-40.
Yeah.
Southwestern Oklahoma is incredibly unique, especially in the early spring. I have seen some incredible wildflower shows down, I think, in Jackson and Harmon County. It's just a different kind of beauty than people are used to. You know, most people like pine trees and mountains, but this is just different. And the same thing goes for northwestern Oklahoma, the parts that aren't covered in wheat. There's just some beautiful grasslands, and I love a beautiful western Oklahoma grassland. Also, northeastern Oklahoma, the Ozark region. I haven't had a lot of opportunities to work there extensively. Again, there's some different plants up there that, you know, I knew at one time, but now they're sort of starting to fade away. I need to get up there. What I need to do is make sure I make a complete round of the state at least every couple of years so I don't get rusty and all those itches are scratched. All those particular habitats have been seen and I have been able to collect plants. Oklahoma is really diverse and we are fortunate in that regard that we can go see all this different stuff.
Okay, well, we'll try to make BioBlitz in person next year so that you can go visit Western Oklahoma again at Romanose.
Now, you need to do some sort of BioBlitz transect where you go from Red Slough to Black Mesa and, you know, spend a different day. That would be incredibly exhausting, but cool.
Okay, question number 4. What advice would you give to someone wanting to become an expert in plants?
Oh my goodness. Go outdoors with somebody who knows what they're talking about as much as possible. Any opportunity that you can get to go out with anybody who knows the names of plants, take that opportunity. This is something you just don't learn in school or from books. There's a class that's really good that most universities have, a basic plant identification class, but it doesn't have the opportunity to touch on very much. You're limited to a couple of months in the fall or a couple of months in the spring where there really aren't many species available to look at. It's just something that you need to see. Any opportunity you can get to look at real plants and to talk to people about what they are, take that opportunity.
And the Native Plant Society does a lot of field trips where people just wander around looking at plants and talking about what they're seeing. Those are good opportunities just to be near people who know a lot about the plants in the region.
Those are excellent opportunities. And of course, in conjunction with the BioBlitz, there are talks from various people.
Okay, last question. What is the next thing you want to learn about? And this doesn't have to be biology related.
Oh my goodness. So a few months ago, got a new dog. And this new dog, shall we say, is spicier than what I am used to. I guess in the past, I've had really easy dogs. This one is a little rescue who was found wandering the mean streets of Yukon. This is a 7-pound dog. He's going to take a little bit more work with the other dogs. So I am delving into the world of dog training.
Oh, wow.
I am hoping to make this boy into a respectable canine citizen someday. I'm trying anyway. That's my task for the next few months.
Well, thank you so much, Amy, for joining me on our BioBlitz Oklahoma podcast. It's been fun chatting with you and talking about plants. And thank you so much for all of your expertise that you share with us during our virtual events on iNaturalist and during our in-person events, which we will look forward to in 2021 with the hopes that we will be vaccinated by then.
Hopefully, yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And thanks to all our podcast listeners. We are looking forward to this new year of podcasting. We are working on new episodes of Meet the Experts, Ask the Experts, and Join the Experts. We are also going to start highlighting state parks to inspire you to visit and explore these amazing natural areas. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen so that you're notified when we upload new episodes. You can also stay up to date on our Facebook page, BioBlitz Oklahoma, and on Twitter at OKBioBlitz. And of course on our website, biosurvey.ou.edu/BioBlitzOK. All of these links will be in our show notes for your reference. We would love to have your feedback about the podcast. You can leave a review where you subscribe, and you can also send us messages through Facebook, Twitter, or simply email me at prill@ou.edu. This podcast is a project of BioBlitz Oklahoma, an outreach program of the Oklahoma Biological Survey at the University of Oklahoma. We hope you have time to step outside today and explore Oklahoma's amazing biodiversity. Remember, you can find biodiversity right outside your own door.